Hey y'all, today we're going to talk a little bit about smoked whiskeys. I'm not talking about the flavor of a smoky whiskey. I think I need a glass of whiskey to do this. One sec. So, smoked whiskey. Now, let's get started. So today we're not here to talk about like flavors of smoked whiskey, like for instance, Scotch or an Islay has this type of smoky flavor versus others have different types of smoky flavor. No, today we're going to talk about malt and how you can smoke malt to make it taste and be different. Before we get too deep into the topic, let's first talk a little bit about what makes a Islay or a Scotch whiskey so smoky. It's actually has nothing to do with the material that goes in it, but rather how those materials are processed before they're used. So malt is generally, or is the idea of you taking barley and letting it germinate, which means letting it sprout just a little bit. And then as it's sprouting, taking that and adding a little bit of heat to it. So let's say you have it on top and adding a little bit of heat on the bottom to slowly dry up and to get the, let's say the half germination, there's a little bit of sprout that happens at the top of a seed, barley is a seed, to stop. Now what we've done is started a process within those seeds, barley, which will help us in the fermentation process later and help us when we cook the grain because it's going to convert more of the starches into sugars. Not to get too much into that rabbit hole, but a lot of that peat or smoky flavor that you get in a single malt is actually derived from the heat source which is used to stop the germination process. So peat is, let's say, the best fire source that the Islay had, or different islands in Scotland had, for creating fire. They don't have a lot of trees there. They don't have a lot of, like, let's say, timber or things they could easily burn without feeling the consequences or without them being very expensive to them to do. But what they have a lot of is peat. And this peat is a highly flammable substance. However, it puts off a lot of flavors or a lot of smoke in its process. So while they're taking this kind of brick of what looks like dried mud and lighting that on fire, creating a lot of heat and drying up the peat or drying up the barley, but with a lot of smoke, this is then adding a little bit of flavor to that barley, to that malted barley, which then, as it's fermented and then distilled, actually still gives a little bit of flavor into the end product, into the end whiskey. Now, as time has gone on, what we've seen is kind of a shift. We're making a lot more whiskey today than we did years ago, so we need to find ways to do this malting process faster, more economically, and in this search, or in the way to kind of, let's say, keep costs down, but keep production high, and still to a good quality, we have found that by using different types of heating mechanisms, let's say instead of using open fire, we're using steam to heat up and dry up the barley. Or we're using electric, many people are using solar panels or wind turbines to, with green energy, stop the malting process. This is all amazing and very good for the world. I'm happy we're doing it. And I'm happy that we're getting a much more consistent whiskey as we are doing this. But some distilleries around the world have figured out that if they are able to take a risk and manage or peat or smoke, we'll talk about this in a bit, and smoke different types of barley or different types of grain, for instance, we're going to talk about a rye in a moment, you're going to get a whole different array of flavors. And it's super interesting and it excites the hell out of me because although right now I'm only purchasing grain from large distributors and manufacturers of grain, there's a lot of, let's say, room for exploration and a whole new unsought after or unknown, let's say, world of whiskey that we are just barely on the precipice of. We on this channel have talked a lot and gone over Whiskey Del Bock before, and I think you've recognized this is one of my favorite whiskeys. It's one of the first times I experimented and had a whiskey, a malted barley, that didn't taste like all the other ones I've ever had. A, wasn't peaty, and B, wasn't just like a regular grain, not regular heat source, dried up barley. So what they've done is to differentiate themselves, A, but B, to bring a little bit of their Arizona culture and a little bit of kind of the resources which they have readily available to them. They started to take the trees, which are, let's say, or the shrubbery, whatever, which is around in their area, and use that to heat up as an open fire source to stop the malting process and to kiln their barley. Now, what they used is mesquite, which if you're from the barbecue world or you've watched some of our other videos, you already know is I like using it a lot in my barbecuing and my smoking, but it has a very rich, intense flavor. And that's what they use here with some pretty good and amazing flavors. Anyone I've ever given this to test loves it. But that's not it. There's other whiskeys around the world, and as I was traveling to Finland, I came across these guys. Now, this company here is a smaller distillery, and what's very interesting about them is they're not only doing this with single malt, or let's say with barley, but they're using rye. So they're smoking rye and using different types of this smoke or different types of rye and different types of barrels and different types of smoke in their production, which makes it super interesting. Now, I don't want to go into the details of what's in here, but if you can ever try something from Cairo, I hope I'm saying that right, but from this distillery, or you can find this set, I found it at the airport, hey, give it a shot. It was mind-blowing, and there was some really cool stuff in here. This whole new world, this whole new kind of exploration into different types of malting, different types of kinning your malt, fascinates the hell out of me. And I look forward to trying the next whiskey that I can, which is in this same space. Not a new recipe, not a new machinery or process, but taking a step back to the germination and the kilning of the grains being used, so the rye or the barley, or anything else these days, who knows, maybe someone's doing this to corn, would be super interesting to try. I mean, again, it's opening up a whole new world and giving a whole new definition to smoky whiskeys. Hey, I cannot wait to try more of it. I hope that if you were aware of it and you like it, keep going with it. Let's keep pushing the market and seeing what people can come up with next and what other flavors they can naturally add to their whiskey. And if this is a completely new topic for you, I heavily recommend, if you're in the US, I don't think you can get this from out of the US, checking out Whiskey Del Bock. And then also Cairo whiskey. This you can get around Europe. I've seen it in Switzerland in our local liquor stores. You can definitely buy it online, but you might not be able to get this full assortment of them. Like these are 4 different ones. They're delicious. Pick them up, try it, especially this taste set. Highly recommended. So give it a shot. While you all are doing that and thinking or Googling, hey, can I find some of this stuff? Are there other ones out there? I'm going to enjoy this glass. Cheers to you and possibly your next smoked, but not with peat, whiskey.